You are going to read an extract from a magazine article. 7 paragraphs have been removed from the extract. Choose from the paragraphs A to H the one which fits each gap, 37 to 43. There is one extra paragraph which you do not need to use. Mark your answers on the separate answer sheet. Cowboys of Madagascar. The anthropologist Luke Freeman joins a group of young Malagasy men on the cattle trail. As a social-cultural anthropologist, I have lived in Madagascar for more than 3 years, and I know the people, the language, and the culture well. The cattle drives undertaken by young Malagasy men have fascinated me ever since I lived in a remote rice farming village in the Central Highlands. On one occasion, a politician was giving a speech in the main street when a long-distance drive passed through. The listener's attention switched immediately to admiring the cattle and greeting the drovers. Young men in rice fields donned spades and ran to the roadside. The schoolmaster let the children out of class, and the boys whooped with glee and ran alongside. The politician's promises fell on deaf ears. This gives an indication of how much the Malagasy love cattle. They are potent symbols on the island, and it is common practice for young men to trade in them prior to marriage. To fulfill my ambition, I headed for the frontier town of Tsirono Anomandidi, looking for a group of drovers with whom to share life on the road. Here I met Vonji, a young man who had spent most of his life driving cattle across the island. We hit it off immediately, and after 20 minutes talking cattle, we took a truck to the isolated market town of Ambato Mainti, where we joined some of his family, who were going to buy cattle to drive east into the highlands. Our destination sat in the middle of nowhere, abandoned in a landscape of wide plains where nothing grows but tall, swaying savanna grass. Undulating hills dip and rise to the horizon, the monotony broken only by the broad red scars of soil erosion. There is often no sign of life for mice. This was the land we were to cross with our herd of 52 zebu steers, the longhorned cattle found all over East Africa and the Indian subcontinent. Ours were ultimately destined for Antananarivo, the Malagasy capital, where they would fetch roughly twice what we had paid for them. Joining up with other herds for safety, we drove them for days under a blazing sun. I had imagined we would stop in the early evening to set up camp. But such was our hurry to make market day in Ciro Anomandidi that we often kept going well after sunset. Far off in the darkness glowed the orange rings of bushfires lit to burn off the old dry grass and bring forth new green shoots. Ground that seemed flat in the daylight became treacherously uneven on a moonless night. Some of us formed a line either side of our cattle as we struggled to keep the herd together, shouting warnings to the drovers behind us. On one occasion we stopped to discover that two of our steers had disappeared. To add to our woes, there was no wood nearby with which to make a fire, and it was a long, slow wait for the rice to boil over smoldering dried cowpats. But we did not dwell on our loss, accepting it in typically Malagasy fashion as the work of fate. The next morning we awoke, dew damp, on a cloudy hilltop, not far from our destination. The cattle smooched slowly in the tall, wet grass. It was just dawn, but a woman and her daughter, who had walked 16 kilometers to set up shop, were already selling coffee and cakes wrapped in leaves. Ciruno Mandidi hosts the largest cattle market in Madagascar. Every Wednesday a huge cloud of dust hangs over the town, raised by the hundreds of cattle pressed into the wooden corrals.